As an investigative journalist, my interest lies in defining the theme of the trial for Duane Keith Davis, aka Keffe D. What are things I want to look into and that we've been tracking is how the jury reacts to my theory, and that is that Keffe D waited until everyone died to fabricate his story. The other is the timeline angle. So here's the deal. What does the jury face? The ultimate verdict is going to hinge on two issues. Did he tell the truth in 2019 when he had no legal pressure and just wanted to cement his historical street legend status? Or is he telling the truth now in 2026 because he's facing life in prison? And whether or not that would force him to admit that he lied back then. There's a difference between the 2008 statement of the knowledge of a hit on Tupac Shakur's life versus an actual confession via the 2019 book. For some of us, we just deem everything to be him exploiting the dead. The defense probably will tell the jury that Keffe D intentionally waited until Orlando Anderson, DeAndre Smith, and Terrence Brown died in 1998, 2004, and 2015 before he began to tell the stories, before he began to utilize their lives as a platform to assert and or build a street legacy. But in 2008, something unique did happen. He was charged as part of a multi-state and domestic drug trafficking ring, and which during that, in lieu of facing life imprisonment, he offered testimony. He offered information. He offered a sworn affidavit in which he stated he had knowledge of the 1996 hit on the life of Tupac Shakur. It is during that particular meeting with members of the FBI and Los Angeles police where he sought immunity from prosecution. But even in that, what is interesting to note, he doesn't give specifics. Rather, he simply states that he had knowledge of it. What did that knowledge constitute that would allow them to have known since 2008, almost 20 years later, before they actually act on it? And it is because at that point, he simply said he had knowledge. It wasn't until after the death of Terrence Brown, who he asserts was also in the Cadillac, that by 2019 he secures a ghostwriter. He then takes the manuscript, he adds his own storyline to the manuscript, and then he utilizes that as a means to sell books. But was that all he was trying to do? It depends. Because many of these individuals are deceased and their families do not have estates, there's no one who's been able to object or sue him for defamation or dispute the claims of what he says happened. And Orlando Baby Lane Anderson was young at that time. And for a lot of the young men who are caught up in the game of being members of the gang, some of them, they look up to these gentlemen as their big brothers. And so they're not going to basically be out here saying what's true and what's false. Nevertheless, what we do know is that Baby is the one that was implicated as the quote unquote shooter. But these are some things that you need to take into consideration if you are also following the case for whatever your reason might be. Why his current narrative changes do not matter. It's the power of inconsistent statements. Under Nevada's evidentiary law, founded at NRS 51.035, if a defendant or witness changes their story at trial, the prosecution can instantly introduce prior recorded statements, book, and interviews as substantive evidence of guilt. And the jury is allowed to look at his 2019 book, his recorded interviews that followed, and conclude that he was telling the truth then and is lying now, or vice versa. And that's the strong point that through an investigative lens that I'm following. Also, you have the independent witness pillar, and that's the state's case regarding the conspiracy does not collapse just before Keffe D tries to walk backwards his words, or what we would call backpedal, right? So if he tries to backpedal at this point, this is why they're using Sean Combs' former bodyguard, Gene Dill, and the former executive with Bad Boy Records, Kirk Burroughs. and I would have concerns if I'm the defense on both of them, and you can easily raise concerns. Gene Deal had a bad fallout with Sean Combs as well as Kirk Burroughs, and both of them may have their own reasons for presenting evidence that he was an intricate part of the Tupac Shakur's hit. However, unique to Kirk Burroughs is that Kirk Burroughs said in 2003 that Sean Combs was intricately involved in the assassination and or the attempt to kill Tupac Shakur. And he actually put that in a 37-page complaint that was filed in the Southern District of New York. That case was dismissed later on different grounds without anyone having the opportunity to look into the accusations. But then the accusations also came up as early as 1999 and again in 2000 when Sean Combs was on trial with Shine and Mr. Jones for the club shooting that involved Mr. Allen and others, and Jennifer Lopez as well. She eventually was able to provide information during her interview and never faced charges. I mean, if you're calling people out, everybody got to get called out, right? Right. Nevertheless, Mr. Jones and Mr. Combs was acquitted. Unfortunately, Shine ended up taking the fall for Sean Combs and suffered 10 years incarceration as a result thereof. The woman who was shot in her face specifically remembered and said that Sean Combs was the person who shot her. She never implicated Shine in that. And so that's enough to be said. Look back over those indictments and also look at the trial transcripts to get more information. Anthony Jones was never deemed to have been a shooter in that incident at all. So let's tie Mr. Jones in because there has been accusations as to whether he is the reason for the East-West Coast rivalry. And that's BS. And it's BS because if you look at what took place at Club Platinum in 1995, 96 Atlanta, November, excuse me, you will note that there had already been some conflicts between the two parties, East and West, if you want to deem them based on demographics. As a result of that, there was harsh words between the parties, but there were several witnesses, including the club's owner, who made clear that Anthony was not the shooter. So the only person who said he was happened to be an informant, and then he shared it with someone else who was a deputy, and that deputy died in a car accident later on. But it was Jermaine Dupree who claimed that Anthony Jones was the shooter, but the witnesses said it was not Anthony who was the shooter. Rather, it was someone from Brooklyn, New York, that was the shooter. And they also went on the owners of the club, who never identified the person's demographics, but made clear that Anthony Jones was not the shooter. And so here you have in Atlanta to party for Jermaine Dupree. Fast forward, he's the only person that pinpoints that Anthony Jones was the shooter. But his statement contradicts witnesses who were there, who was outside. But it also calls into question the deputy sheriff's statement, in which he claims that he chased these people from behind the building and that one of the persons still had the ability to fire. Okay, well, if that person had the ability to fire, but the other people are saying Mr. Jones was located in this particular section outside of the club at that moment, then who are you saying did the shooting? People did come forward and they did attest to who the shooter was. And that was one of the reasons why Mr. Jones was never prosecuted. There was never any evidence that implicated him as the actual shooter. Was he present at the club? Yes, and so was Sean Combs. And so was a host of other people. Okay, so to assert that that began the quote unquote feud, it did not. The altercation was verbal between the parties. And so obviously, the fact that there was an altercation clearly establishes for many people following that incident back then, there already was some heat between the parties. Okay, and so to have Gene Dills now come forward to provide or profit testimony regarding an East-West Coast rivalry the following year it calls into question a lot of issues. And here's the bigger question: why were they out there anyway? And so Kirk Burroughs is going to attest that he had evidence that vehicles were rented to transport people from Harlem, New York, to the place, and that ties it to Vegas for the fight. And so here's the thing that comes in now. If we're looking at a framework of timeline, again, as an investigative journalist, my goal is to hit on the logistics, okay? And so I'm going to hit on logistics and the impossibility that completely destroys the credibility of Keffe D's timeline. And here's the breakdown from my investigation. Here it is. It's Las Vegas. It's September 7th, 1996. Keffe claims that it was the result of a quote-unquote casino brawl involving Orlando Anderson, Tupac Shakur at the MGM Grand that happened right after the Mike Tyson fight, sometime between 8:30 and 8:45. Now follow that. If in fact the sole purpose of your pursuing Tupac Shakur was an actual and approximate cause of this interaction and altercation between your quote unquote nephew and Crip brother Anderson, then how would you have known to go to Zip? Zip is Eric Vaughn, the late Eric Vaughn, who was a mainstream in the Harlem scene back in the day, but he's also Christopher Wallace's godfather. Christopher Wallace is Biggie. So how would you have known to find Zip, go into Zip's car, have a conversation with Zip that warranted Foxy Brown being asked to leave the vehicle so that you and Zip can confer and you can get a firearm from him? Now, Zip is East Coast, old school back then. How would you have known to go to him? How did you even know he was out there? Zip never identified as a Crip. Zip was old school. At best, deemed kingpin. Right? So you know to be in Vegas, which is where you live, but you know to go to somebody from New York to inquire of that person to have access to a firearm that you anticipate on utilizing in the assassination of Tupac Shakur. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Nevertheless, especially since you're saying that it transpired immediately after the fight. So how did you get scrambled to pursue Eric Von Zip Martin, who was out in Vegas with a group of people to facilitate getting the lock? So there's a logistical nightmare in that. There were no smartphones back then. There were no tracking apps. There was no way that you can pinpoint exactly where he was, right? The strip has millions of people out there for a fight, right? But you were able to pinpoint exactly where he was. So the idea that Keffe D could walk out of a chaotic casino brawl, instantly track down a New York drug kingpin in a city of millions within minutes, secure a specific firearm, find a rental Cadillac, locate Tupac's BMW caravan by 11 p.m. as he's en route to Club 662, where he was expected to do some performing or participate, really calls into question the credibility. And why Zip matters. He matters is because of the parallel in 1997 when they go after Christopher Biggie Smalls Wallace, which is his godfather. Did they pursue Christopher because someone had now learned and or heard, be it street rumor or gossip or from the street committee, that the firearm purportedly came from Zip? So you go after his godson, Biggie? I don't know. I'm always asking who had life insurance on who. I mean, these guys were part of an artist. Okay, and they were part of an artistry list. And so did the labels have insurance on them? Back then, the labels insured people, just like Michael Jackson was under insurance. So they don't simply just insure you to make sure that you can make it to concerts and whatnot. So as label owners, did they have insurance on Tupac Shakur? Was Biggie's life insured by Bad Boy? Was Tupac's life insured by Death Row? So there are so many angles and questions to which one would ask. But then you also have to analyze what they're saying happened once they rode up to the vehicle. So you get up to the vehicle and you immediately see Tupac reach for what you believe is a firearm. Really? Is that what happened? And so now if you throw that out there, you're suggesting that you acted in self-defense as opposed to one who went out there to initiate a shooting, right? So let's tie this into Kirk Burroughs' 2003 statement that's made within the ambit of his initial litigation against Sean Combs. And that is interesting because initially he was scheduled to appear in court on November 18th. He had subpoenaed Anthony Wolf Jones because Anthony was not going to testify. And so they subpoenaed him. And so within days after he is subpoenaed, he is murdered in Atlanta on November 11th. 2 days later, Sean Combs moves to Southern District of New York with the motion to dismiss Mr. Cookborough's case. It is granted, and then it loses on appeal. Something to think about. We'll be developing that in the lyrical legacy of Anthony Wyeth Jones, which is tied into the uh, Ron Ball, Allen Iverson way. Okay, so all of this becomes part of this quote unquote perfect street legend narrative that truly has true crime fans and book buyers wanting to read. But forensically and logistically speaking, the timeline has massive holes. At best, at 63 years of age, Duane Keith Davis, aka Keffe D, will get 3 hots and a cot, okay, and healthcare, and die behind the wall. And he'll live out his life behind bars. He's already under a 40-month prison sentence for the offensive battery stemming from a prison fight, which he said was self-defense. He was already being held on charges for the murder of Tupac Shakur. So, yeah, join us for the upcoming documentary on Ron Ball, the Allen Iverson Way. Stay in the loop. I'm going to drop some new music that's going to be part of a teaser for the Anthony Wyeth Jones documentary, the lyrical legacy of Anthony Wyeth Jones. And then you have Ron Ball, the Allen Iverson Way. Okay. Thank you for joining me. This is Lisa Hampton. Love is selflessly authentic, having all money, power, talent, opportunities now. Yeah, we're going to be following this case to see exactly where it goes. Stay tuned.